My name is Emily Carter. I'm 19 and my life has never been what you'd call simple. But recently things got complicated, really complicated. Before we begin, I want to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of new motherhood, family relationships, and infidelity. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now. My mom, Diane, she's everything to me. She raised me on her own, and for as long as I can remember, it's always been just the two of us. We didn't have much growing up, but somehow we made it work. She's strong like that, the kind of person who refuses to let life break her, no matter what comes her way. Even after my dad walked out on us when I was 5, even after years of working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, she was the glue that held us together. But about a year ago, it felt like that glue started to crack. When my mom met David, it was like she found this missing piece of herself. She always used to say she didn't need a man to be happy, and for years I believed her. But then David came into our lives. He was different. Charming, confident, the kind of guy who walks into a room and just owns it, you know? He made her laugh like I hadn't seen in years. And as much as I hate to admit it, I liked him too. At least at first. But here's the thing about David. He's the kind of man you notice. You can't help it. He's attractive, not just to my mom but to everyone. Tall, fit, with this easygoing smile that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. And the worst part? He knows it. He's so comfortable with himself, maybe too comfortable. He'd walk around the house in nothing but his boxers or shirtless half the time, like it was no big deal. First, I told myself it didn't matter. He was just being himself. And it was his house too, right? But after a while it started to feel weird. I'd catch myself noticing things about him, like how his tattoos moved when he stretched, or the way he laughed at his own stupid jokes. And that wasn't okay. I shouldn't have been noticing those things. I didn't know what to do with those feelings, so I buried them. Told myself it didn't matter. It was just a stupid crush or whatever. But then Florida happened. And everything changed. The trip was supposed to be a fresh start for all of us. My mom's idea, of course. She thought it'd be a good way to bring us closer together, to make things feel more like a family. And honestly, I wanted that too. I wanted to feel normal again. But looking back now, I think that trip did the opposite. It was the beginning of the end. She booked this Airbnb right by the beach. It was cute. One of those houses with a pool and palm trees everywhere. It was perfect. Too perfect. I should have known something was going to happen. I should have known nothing was going to stay the same. That trip. It's the reason I'm telling this story. It's the reason everything fell apart. If you're still with me, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, there's so much more to uncover. When we got to Florida, it was everything my mom had hyped up. The sun, the palm trees, the warm breeze. Felt perfect. Almost unreal. We were staying in this cute little house with a pool, and for a moment I actually let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this trip would work. Maybe it would bring us closer as a family. I mean, that's all my mom really wanted, for me to get along with David. To see him as some kind of father figure or something. But that's not what happened. Not even close. It all started with the room situation. The house had 2 bedrooms, one for my mom and David, obviously, and the other one was supposed to be mine. But at the last minute, my mom decided to invite Aunt Linda to join us for part of the trip. And just like that, I lost my room. David told me we'd have to share. Not just a room. A bed. He said it like it was no big deal, like it didn't even cross his mind that it might be awkward. He even laughed about it, saying, "We're family now, right? It'll be fine." Fine. That's what I told myself too. I didn't want to make it weird. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it or give my mom any reason to think I wasn't okay with her decision to bring Linda. So I just nodded and went along with it. Even though everything inside me was screaming that this was a bad idea. I mean, how was I supposed to feel okay about sharing a bed with my stepdad? But David didn't seem to care. He just tossed his bag on the bed like it was the most normal thing in the world and went about his day. Meanwhile, I was in my head, overthinking every little thing. Do I sleep in my jeans? Do I change in the bathroom? How do I even handle this without looking like a complete idiot? That first night was awkward. There's no other way to describe it. I waited until David was already in the room before I grabbed my stuff and went to the bathroom to change. I stayed in there as long as I could, trying to work up the courage to walk back out. I don't know why I felt so self-conscious. It's not like he cared what I wore to bed. But I cared. I felt exposed, even in something as simple as my pajamas. And when I finally came out, he was just lying there, shirtless, leaning back against the pillows like it was nothing, like it was completely normal. And for him, maybe it was. But for me, I couldn't even look at him. I climbed into bed, as far to the edge as I could get, pulled the blanket up to my neck like it was some kind of shield, and just stared at the ceiling. I couldn't stop thinking about how close we were, about how I could feel the bed shifting every time he moved, or how I could hear the sound of him breathing slow, steady, like he didn't have a care in the world. Meanwhile, I couldn't even relax enough to close my eyes. I don't even know how long I lay there. Hours probably, just staring into the darkness, trying to make sense of all the things I was feeling. I mean, I knew it was normal to feel weird about sharing a bed with my stepdad. Who wouldn't? But this wasn't just weird. It was something else. Something I couldn't explain. I hated myself for noticing him the way I did. For noticing how his tattoos moved when he stretched. Or how his laugh burst out when he thought something was funny. Those weren't thoughts I was supposed to have. But they were there. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop them. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. My mom? She'd be horrified. My friends? They wouldn't understand. And honestly, I didn't even understand. All I knew was that I felt trapped. In that bed. In that house. In my own head. And no matter how much I tried to push it all away, just kept coming back. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted. Physically, mentally, emotionally. And the worst part? That was only the first night. The trip was just getting started, and I already felt like I was drowning. The second night, God, the second night was where everything changed. I thought maybe it would be easier. You know, after barely sleeping the night before. I figured I'd just pass out and not have to think about anything. I thought I'd be too drained to feel awkward or overthink. But instead, I woke up in the middle of the night, and everything was different. I don't even know how it happened. One minute I was asleep. The next, I realized I wasn't where I had been when I closed my eyes. I was closer to him. So close that my arm was touching his. And I could feel his warmth. It wasn't intentional. At least, I don't think it was. But the moment I realized it, my heart just stopped. I froze. For what felt like forever. I told myself to move back, to get as far away as possible. But for some reason, I didn't. I just stayed there. And I couldn't figure out why. At first, I thought maybe he hadn't noticed. He was so still, his breathing steady like he was still asleep. But then he moved. Just a little. At first, it seemed like he was shifting in his sleep. But then he turned over. Toward me. I thought my heart was going to explode. I squeezed my eyes shut, thinking that maybe if I just pretended to still be asleep, it would all go away. But when I opened them, he was looking at me. He was awake. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even move. I just lay there, staring at him completely frozen. And then he said, "It's okay. Don't worry about it." Like it was nothing. Like I wasn't lying there, absolutely losing my mind. I didn't know how to take that. Was he trying to make me feel better? Was he saying it because he thought I was scared? Or was there something else he wasn't saying? His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something I couldn't figure out, something that made me feel confused. And then, he reached out, just for a second, his hand on my shoulder. It wasn't just a pat. It lingered, long enough to make me wonder what he meant by it, long enough to make my chest tight. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell him it was an accident, that I didn't mean to end up so close to him. But I didn't. I just stayed there, completely still, while my brain spiraled out of control. And then, he moved his hand again. Not much, just enough. Enough to feel like it wasn't innocent. Enough to make it clear that it wasn't nothing. And I didn't stop him. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I just know that I didn't pull away, even though I knew I should have. Even though everything inside me was screaming that this was wrong, that I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But I couldn't make myself move. I couldn't even think straight. All I could feel was this strange mix of fear and something else. Something I didn't want to admit was there. I felt guilty and excited at the same time. Like I was teetering on the edge of something I didn't understand. And it terrified me. It didn't last long. A second, maybe two. And then, he stopped. He rolled onto his back. Closed his eyes. Like nothing had happened. Like it was just another normal night. But for me, it was anything but normal. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what had just happened. What it meant. What I was supposed to do now. I couldn't sleep after that. I just kept replaying it in my head, over and over, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out if I'd done something wrong, if I'd somehow let it happen. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find the answer. All I knew was that everything was different now. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The next morning, everything felt off. The air was heavy, like we were both trying to act like nothing had happened. I woke up before David did. For a while, I just lay there, staring at the wall, trying to figure out how I was supposed to get through the day. My chest felt tight. My stomach was in knots. I couldn't stop replaying everything from the night before. But at the same time, I didn't even want to think about it. I wanted it to just go away. When David finally woke up, he acted completely normal. He stretched, yawned, gave me this casual smile, like we hadn't crossed a line, like it was just another day. But the way he looked at me, it wasn't the same. There was tension. He didn't say anything about the night before. But the way his eyes lingered on me just a little too long. The way his tone was softer than usual. It was like he was testing me, waiting to see if I'd say something. I didn't. I couldn't. I just kept quiet, pretending like everything was fine. Even though my head was screaming at me to figure out what the hell had just happened, I tried to focus on anything else. What we'd have for breakfast. What the weather was like. Anything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. And then, there was my mom. So oblivious. She didn't notice a thing. She kept going on about how excited she was for our plans that day. How happy she was that we were all here together. And every time she smiled at me, every time she laughed at one of David's jokes, it made me feel sick. She had no idea. No idea what had happened while she was asleep in the next room. And I hated myself for not telling her. For keeping this secret from her. David, though, he was different around her. I noticed it immediately. He was trying harder, complimenting her more, helping her with little things, going out of his way to be the perfect husband. But at the same time, he was careful, like he was afraid she'd pick up on something if he let his guard down. I don't think she noticed, though. She was too happy to see it. She was so sure this trip was bringing us closer together. And I just went along with it. Because what else could I do? I couldn't ruin this for her. I couldn't tell her the truth. And that's when I realized. I was trapped. Trapped in this secret. Trapped in this house. Trapped in my own head. And I didn't know how to make it stop. Some days he was overly nice. Asking how I was doing, offering to help with random things, even suggesting we spend time together, just the two of us. And then there were other days when he wouldn't even look at me. Like he couldn't stand to be in the same room. It was this constant back and forth, and it made me feel like I was losing my mind. Like I didn't know where I stood with him anymore. Or how I was supposed to act. And then there was my mom. God, my mom. Every time I saw her trying so hard to connect with him, I felt like the worst person in the world. She loved him. She didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve the lies, the tension, the cracks that were starting to form between them. And every time she hugged me or told me how much she loved me, it just made the guilt worse. Because I was keeping this secret from her. And it was destroying her marriage. I kept telling myself it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't done anything wrong. But deep down I didn't believe that. I couldn't. Because if I hadn't been there, if I hadn't let things happen the way they did, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe they'd still be happy. Maybe everything would still be normal. It all came to a head one night. I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. My mom was asking him why he'd been so distant, why he wasn't as charming or attentive as he used to be. And David, he just stood there. He didn't even try to deny it. He just kept saying, I don't know, over and over again. And my mom looked so broken. I could hear it in her voice when she asked, is there someone else? Is that why you're pulling away? For a second, I thought he was going to say something. I thought he was going to tell her the truth. But he didn't. He just shook his head.
No.
Of course not. I went back to my room after that. I couldn't listen anymore. I just sat on my bed staring at the floor, feeling like my chest was going to cave in. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to run into the kitchen and tell her everything. To beg her to forgive me. To take it all off my shoulders. But I couldn't. I couldn't even move. Because no matter how much I hated myself for lying to her, I was terrified of what would happen if she found out. Of what she'd think of me. Of what she'd do to David. Of how it would all end. And then, a couple of days later, it happened. The thing I had been dreading. My mom found something. I don't even know how. Maybe she went through his phone. Maybe she overheard something she wasn't supposed to. But she knew. I could see it in her face when she confronted me. She came into my room, shut the door behind her and asked, "What's going on between you and David?" Just like that.
No build up. No hesitaschen.
Just the question I had been running from since the trip. I froze. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to lie. To say nothing, Mom. Nothing's going on. But I couldn't. Because the way she looked at me, it was like she already knew. Like she was just waiting for me to admit it. And I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the disappointment in her eyes. The anger. The hurt. So I just sat there. Staring at her. Unable to speak. And then David walked in. He must have heard us talking because he came in and asked, "What's going on?" My mom turned to him, her voice shaking. "You tell me." And the way he looked at her. It was like all the color drained from his face. He didn't know what to say either. None of us did. We just stood there. Trapped in this horrible silence. Until my mom finally broke down. And David. He didn't say anything. And neither did I. We just stood there. Watching her fall apart. Because we were too scared to admit what we had done. Too scared to face the consequences. And in that moment I realized something. I wasn't just carrying the weight of the secret anymore. I was carrying the weight of her pain. And I knew, no matter what happened next, things would never be the same again. Looking back on everything now, feels like a bad dream. A dream I can't wake up from, no matter how hard I try. It's been months since it all happened. But it's still with me. The shame, the guilt, the confusion. It's like this shadow that follows me everywhere I go. Some days it feels so heavy I can't breathe. Other days I almost convince myself I'm okay. Almost. David and my mom, they're not the same anymore. Their marriage is hanging on by a thread. And I know. I'm the reason why. My mom doesn't know everything. She never will. But I think she knows enough. She knows David wasn't who she thought he was. And even though she doesn't say it, I can feel it. In the way she looks at me sometimes. Like she's trying to figure out if I'm hiding something. And I am. I always will be. I don't see David much anymore. He's still around, of course. He's still married to my mom. But I avoid him as much as I can. I don't talk to him. I don't look at him. I don't let myself be in the same room with him if I can help it. First he tried to reach out. Tried to act like nothing had changed. But I think he's starting to get it now. I think he knows I'm done. But it's not just him. I've pulled away from everyone. My mom. My friends. Even myself. I guess I thought that if I put some distance between me and everything that happened, it would make it easier. But it hasn't. If anything, it's made it harder. Because now, I'm alone with my thoughts. And the truth is, I don't know how to feel about any of it. But I do know one thing. I can't keep living like this. I need to find a way to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I think I'm ready to try.